Please stand. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Looking up, Jesus saw wealthy people putting their offerings into the treasury, and he also noticed a poor widow putting in 2 copper coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has given more than all the rest. For the others have all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has given all that she had to live on." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Please be seated. Dear brothers and sisters, I would like to begin this reflection on the theme of our gifts, time, talent, and treasure, by telling a story of 2 water jars. Once upon a time, there was a farmer who bought 2 water jars to carry water from the river to his garden. But unfortunately, one of them was cracked at the bottom. Every day the farmer went to the river, used those jars to draw water, and brought them to his garden. But the cracked one leaked along the way, and it made him feel useless. In addition, the other jar had been feeling proud, used to make tease of him every time he spilled water. One day he couldn't stand it anymore, and he asked the father to throw him away. However, the farmer smiled, saying, "Did you see the road in our town recently?" They went back down to the road, and there were many beautiful flowers. "Do you see that?" said the farmer. "The water that you have spilled so far has grown these plants." Dear brothers and sisters, no one is perfect. We all have our flaws in some points. However, even though we are imperfect, God created us with our own gifts that we are still able to contribute in building up our family, our parish, and community. Yes, we are talking about time, talent, and treasure that we are given by God. First, time. Our time begins at birth and ends on this earth with death. For most, it is about 25,000 days, maybe 70 years. Our time is precious and cannot be stored up like a grain in a barn. Once a moment passes, it is gone forever. God wants all of us to reach heaven. That is why He created us and why He sent us Jesus. Our life on earth is a pilgrimage toward heaven. Each day, each week, each month, and each year, we must be progressive on our pilgrimage. We cannot do this unless we give some time to God. Through daily prayer, we develop a close personal relationship with God, sharing with Him our successes and failures, and asking for His guidance in our daily lives. And it is significant when we can set up time and pray together as a family. I am grateful for my parents who have attended Holy Mass every day and urged their children to do the same. They also have kept encouraging and forcing sometimes their children to pray a rosary with them at the end of the day before sleeping. To be honest, I was not really interested in doing that when I was a young boy, especially when TV had an exciting movie that I like to watch at the same time. But now, when looking back, I realized that it was one of the best ways they had based their faith on me. I'm not really sure, but sometimes I think that maybe because of their devotion, God chose two of their children, my older brother and I, to be his priest through the intercession of our Blessed Mother. We should remember the words of Pope Saint John Paul II. The family that prays together stays together. Assisting other members of family, individuals, or groups is another way to share our personal time to the glory of God. We shall show our love for Him by letting Christ use our feet, our hands, our eyes, and our voice. Your gift of time is unique because you are the only one who can give it. Second, talent. All of us have special talents or gifts, which are a sign of the power and majesty of God, who can do all things. These talents and gifts are not given to us just for our own use, but are given to us for the enrichment of the lives of others, and so that we can serve God better. St. Peter in his first letter tells us, like a good steward of the varied graces of God, use whatever gift each one of you has received to serve one another. All of Christ's works need to be done in our parish and community. And as you know, Christ is not physically present in our parish to visit the sick and elderly, to feed the hungry, teach those who want to learn, console the lonely and sorrowful, pray for the needs, and to give a helping hand and a kind word. Christ depends on each of us to do these spiritual works of mercy in His name. God makes us co-workers with Christ in the holy works of redemption. What a privilege. Your gift of talent is a special gift only you can give. Remember the words of St. Francis of Assisi. It is in giving that we receive. Third, treasure. The Christian's need to share our gifts of treasure may be best illustrated by the well-known parable of the talents, Matthew chapter 25, which speaks of a man preparing to travel to a far country. Before departing, he gives talents or money to his servants. The first servant receives 5 talents and works to build them into 5 more. The second servant, who receives 2 talents, doubles their value as well. But the third servant, who receives 1 talent, buries it. When the master returns, he praises the first and the second servants, but he takes the 1 talent from the third servant, because the servant was not a good steward of the money, having done nothing to increase its value. The lesson of the parable of the talents is that we are to make good use of material gifts given to us by God. To do nothing with them is just as wrong. When we do make the most of material possessions, Sacred Scripture points out 2 ways we can show our gratitude to God for His gifts. Firstly, because God is the giver, some percentage of what is received must be returned to him as an act of gratitude. Secondly, there should be some sharing of our money and material goods with those in need in our family, parish, community, diocese, and world. Your gift of treasure is a direct gift only you can give. Again, St. Francis of Assisi teaches us, it is in giving that we receive. I would like to conclude this reflection by an anecdote from the life of Saint John Maria Vianney. When Brother John Vianney was called by the rector of the major seminary to inform him of the report he received from the professors regarding whether he could be promoted to the sacrament of priesthood, the rector was very nervous and perplexed in communicating the message. But he had no other choice. He said, "John Vianney, the professors do not find you fit for sacred ordination to priesthood. Some of them have called you an ass, knowing nothing of theology. How can we promote you to the reception of the sacrament of priesthood?" Brother Vianney was not perplexed at all. He replied, "Father Rector, in the book of Judges, chapter 15, we have the narration of how God made use of Samson to kill 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass to save the people of Israel. If with the useless jawbone of an ass, God could do that wonderful deed, how much more can he accomplish with the whole of an ass like me?" On hearing this answer from John Vianney, his rector indeed felt very light and joyful, and he had no difficulty in promoting him to be the sacred ordination to priesthood. John Vianney became a great saint of the Church, the patron saint of all priests. He offered back to God all he had, time, maybe not too much treasure and talent, but so much love to save souls. May we use our gifts, time, treasure, and talent to build up our family, parish, diocese, to glorify God and to save souls. Amen. You may be seated. The theme of our mission is on the domestic church, or living out and building our faith in the home. And the tagline we put for tonight's talk was called "Burning Down the House." And this is a little talk on some of those threats, or at least one big threat that is coming after the expression of faith in the modern world. And if we better understand it, we can have a better understanding of how to then counter it in our own lives. One of the questions I posed in my Bolton article a few weeks ago for people to ask themselves was, do I always know what is best for me? And I knew that that would be a question that would be a little bit controversial, because
Surely, if you're a grown-up, of course you know what is best for you. But really what the question is getting at, is there ever an opportunity where maybe you would look to someone else for advice on something? Maybe you're not so sure. Maybe there is a higher power or another way of thinking about life that could convince you to change your mind, or maybe take on a different path. Recognizing that perhaps my own mind and my own will are not the most powerful forces in the universe, but is it possible for me to experience something like religious submission? Would I ever submit to the will of God? If the priest got up on Sunday and said something about religion, about faith, about who God was, would I change my mind for that, or would I always stick with it no matter what? And sometimes I'll hear people talk about going to a Bible study or a catechism study, and something will come up that is a doctrine or a dogma of the church, and some people, even Catholics, will scoff at it. They'll laugh, and they'll say, "No way, I don't believe that, and I will never believe that." And then half the group might say, "Well, yeah, but this is what the church teaches," and they just laugh again. And they'll say something like, "Well, the church just needs to get with the times." I'm sure this is a thought that's gone through many of our heads over the years, where we get frustrated with something that sounds a little bit medieval or old-fashioned. I think, well, most people don't think that way anymore, so why would the church still continue to teach that? It goes back to a little bit of the topic I talked about yesterday, was this understanding of, well, how do we know that the church is right? How do we know that Christianity is the one and true religion, and that the Catholic Church is handing on the faith of Jesus Christ, which is what God has determined faith to be? And am I able to believe that strong enough to help and try and convince others that it is also the truth? The subject that I'm going to be talking about more specifically is the greatest heresy that has ever hit the world, and it is called modernism. Even using the word modernism, though, might sound like a bit of an old-fashioned term, but we're going to go with it as it stands. Modernism means an exaggerated love of what is modern, or an infatuation for modern ideas. Put another way, it is assuming something is good just because it is new. If there's a new way of doing things, it is obviously better because it's the new way. If you wanted to take kind of a concrete example of the difference between modernism and what we would call maybe an older way of thinking, is the difference between the metric system and the imperial system. I know back before I was born, around the time I was born, there was a big push in America for everyone to adopt the metric system. Maybe you were part of that push when it was going on, because, well, in Europe, they used the metric system, and many other places in the world use the metric system. Well, we should do that too, without ever wondering why it might be a better system. Well, it is simply newer, and it seems more scientific, so we should go with that. The problem with the metric system is that it is not a very human form of measurement, whereas the imperial system is. You know, the foot is based on the size of an old king's foot. Pound is about the weight of a loaf of bread. If you cut a pie, you don't cut it into 10 pieces, you cut it into 9 pieces. Or if it's a pizza, maybe 12 pieces. If you look at the way our theology is expressed, it is in a trinity, not 5 or 10, but 3. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The family unit is based around 3. Mom, Dad, and the baby. We talk about extended family. We talk about it in terms of 3, with grandparents, parents, and child. The seasons of the year are split out into 4, just like the directions on a compass, north, east, south, and west. And that can be then divided into all sorts of different ways of looking at the compass. But when you try to do this with 100 or with 10, it falls apart pretty quickly. You know how difficult it is to split a bill at the restaurant using the metric system. When you have a bill, it's $100, but you have to split it 3 ways. How do you do that? It works okay for scientists and bankers, but for human life, we tend to think of things in 3s and 4s and 6s and 12s. And the way that we live out our daily life is something that is much more grounded in the reality that we've experienced every day, not in just a new idea that was given to us by someone who decided that it was better. Well, this modernism is the idea that it is going to be science and a kind of a rationalistic way of looking at things that is going to raise up the human race. It is also reflected in an idea about how Catholics think about faith itself. That it becomes to a point where it is so practical that it doesn't even allow for miracles. When people who are in the modern world will sometimes describe themselves as atheists, but they're really not atheists. They're just really more pragmatists. They just want to see what they can see, believe what they can believe, and take a kind of scientific look at the world. And if the consensus among many people is that it ought to change, then they'll just change it. And truly being an atheist takes a lot of hard work. Most people just tend to be indifferent towards it. This is what someone said that I like, so I'm just going to go off and follow that. And that's a problem with modernism, is that it is so easy for people to listen to and accept because it is always just doing something new. It's not fixed. If you believe in modernism, then you can change your mind every single day. And even what you believed yesterday can be wrong, even though you believed it very firmly. It is this constant and ever-changing way of looking at the world. There was a monk, Cavallanti, who gave a different definition of it. Modernism is modern in a false sense of the word. It is a morbid state of conscience among Catholics, and especially the young, that professes manifold ideals, opinions, and tendencies. From time to time, these tendencies work out into systems that are to renew the basis and superstructure of society, politics, philosophy, theology, of the Church herself, and of the Christian religion. Even though elements of modernism have been present through many of the Church's ancient heresies, they really began to be codified during the French Revolution, where the French Revolution's idea was that the way the old world was put together was just not very rational, was not very scientific. We just needed to get down to the bare bones of what humanity really needs, and just make them into good citizens of the state, good workers for the factory, but not too many of them. You know, in the French Revolution, they had determined that there were just too many people in France, and the goal among the revolutionaries was to kill millions of people, even at that time in the 1700s, so that they could get to a more manageable population that they could do with their science and their numbers. We only need 100 people to work this area of farmland, so we're just going to get rid of the rest. It seeks to turn the human person into just another cog in a wheel. And if the plan changes tomorrow, then the plan changes tomorrow. You saw this happening again in communist Russia and China, where the human person was simply ground into dust. And there was no understanding of the dignity of the human person, because if that person did not follow the ideals of the state, whatever they were, then they were just useless. Whereas in the Catholic understanding of the world, we would see each human person as unique and special, wonderful, a gift and a creation of God that ought to always be respected, loved, and cared for. The funny thing is that in their words about what modernism meant, they used many sorts of words like liberty and equality and fraternity, but also this complete emancipation. He goes on, a spirit of complete emancipation, tending to weaken ecclesiastical authority. The emancipation of science, which must traverse every field of investigation without fear of conflict with the Church. The emancipation of the state, which should never be hampered by religious authority. The emancipation of the private conscience, whose inspirations must not be overridden by papal definitions or anathemas. The emancipation of the universal conscience, with which the Church should be ever in agreement. You saw this happening in a lot of the nationalistic movements prior to World War II. And in World War II, there was this movement towards the industrialization, even further, of society, taking some of those things that the French Revolution had proposed, and then turning them into the wheels of war. And many of those national, it wasn't just the Nazis who did this, but many of those societies were saying, well, there are certain people that are undesirable, so we'll just get rid of them. There are certain people that don't fit into a scientific understanding of what the human person ought to be, so we just get rid of them. And if there's land over there that we want, we just go get it. And it was people like the Pope or the priest or the bishop who'd be saying, no, you can't do that. You can't just kill people. You can't just take land. You have to respect these national borders. You have to do things like take care of your poor and your sick and those who are in need. But when you're moving in this mindset of constantly shifting and changing ideals that only seek to serve the ends of the state or my personal whim, then of course the idea of fraternal charity and love go right out the window. And if you can get rid of those things, then there's nothing you won't be able to do. And I'm not saying that in a good way. I'm saying that in a very bad way. And we saw this played out with the deaths of millions upon millions of people during these great wars, all in the name of this modernistic understanding of the state being the ultimate arbiter of what is good today. And we could change what it is tomorrow. Now, we also see a difference here between the Catholic understanding of religion and a Protestant understanding of religion. One of the things that happened with a lot of the Protestant reformers was that they turned their churches into another arm of the state. You had these state religions. So if you went to certain countries in Norway, your religion, or in Scandinavia, your religion might be Lutheranism, or the next one, another country might be Calvinism, or another place it might be Anglicanism. And each of those states now would set up their own religions. Well, the reason why this happened was that because those priests kept getting up there and preaching the gospel and listening to the Pope and the authority of Christ, it was getting very much a thorn in the foot of these rulers who wanted to be in complete control. Again, following their whims, what they thought was right because they were the king, or they were the smartest person, or the most powerful person in the room. So you get rid of all the clergy, get rid of all the bishops, get rid of all the priests and the deacons, and then you need some. Because people still want to go to religion. They still want to go to church. So you take some of your political cronies and some of your friends over here and say, okay, guess what? You're now the priest, you're now the bishop, you're now the deacon, now get to work. But you can only maintain your position in those churches if you do what the state tells you to do. And so the idea of this modern understanding of religion was that it was only supposed to walk hand in hand with whatever the spirit of the age was. Whatever the prince or the king decided was good for that day, he would call up the local bishop and say, this is what we're teaching and believing today, so get on board. And then that guy knew where his paycheck came from, so that is just what he would do. And so you see how there's been this huge diversion in what Christians of all stripes believe now. In the last few hundred years, the churches have really diverged about what it means to be a Christian. And when we talk about moral authority, how the churches can talk about so many different things about human life, human sexuality, the obedience to the state, and religious freedom, and what is proper to say or not say, and on and on and on. The town I grew up in had, I think, 100 different churches, and each of them would have been preaching a different gospel on Sunday, because it was just that individual person's understanding of what they interpreted that day. Again, this modernistic understanding of religion is that I am the one who knows what is right, not God. I know what is right. And I say this sitting here standing here in a church right in front of the Blessed Sacrament, where it is not Father Paul who is really teaching you tonight, it is Jesus Christ who is teaching you. And saying that these are the ancient truths that God gave to the world, and we're going to give them to you today. But be aware of the snakes in the grass, and those instincts are going to draw you away from a spirit of true religion. So when the religion is just another arm of the state, it is no wonder that things can change, because we know how often politics can change in our world and in our country today, where every election brings about a whole new set of problems. And because we don't have a single moral foundation for our society, there are hundreds of different responses we might make to the challenges of the age. He continues, it is also a spirit of movement and change, with an inclination to a sweeping form of evolution, such as abhors anything fixed and stationary. So it is not that modern ideas change frequently, it is also that anything that is fixed or stationary is wrong, by the very fact of being fixed and stationary. So the church has always been, for instance, pro-life. The church has always recognized that life begins at birth, and abortion is a wicked sin, and the most innocent life should always be protected. And this, you go back to the ancient days of the church, this is something that we always practiced. In ancient Rome, one of the things Christians were known for was rescuing unwanted babies. Because if a Roman family had a child they could not pay for, they would just take the baby out to the swamp or out to the woods and just abandon it. The Christians would run out there every morning or every night, and they'd pick up all these abandoned babies and raise them in orphanages. And the Romans couldn't understand why you would ever want to do something like that. It was such an unbelievable idea, something that they could not conceive. Why would you want a kid you couldn't pay for? But again, that's the way of the world speaking. Where what Christianity brought was a divine way of thinking, something that was fixed and pure, that was respectful of basic things like human life. In the ancient world, it wasn't often God who was in control of these societies, but the devil and his demons were the ones who were planting these horrible thoughts in people's heads, where things like the murder of children was something that was perfectly acceptable. And we would look back at that today and say, oh, we would never get there. We would never get there. But now, in this great modern age, there's no wickedness that was practiced in ancient Rome or ancient Greece that we have not doubled and tripled in size in our modern world. All because of this idea that the church, the pope, the bishop, the priest, they cannot tell me what to do because I know what is best. I'm sure we know many people like this in our own lives. He continues, the spirit of reconciliation among all men through the feelings of the heart. At my talk yesterday, I talked about the difference between intellectual knowledge and just doing things by feeling. Feelings can sometimes be up and down and all over the place, but intellectual knowledge of what is right and good should always be directing us. And having your intellect properly formed is one of the most important things that we do as Christians. But this idea of a spirit of reconciliation among all men through the feelings of the heart is a problem that comes from modernism. I'll explain why it's a problem here in a moment. Because at the surface, it sounds pretty good. Well, we should. Jesus says love one another, right? Of course he does. But there's a but on there. Many and varied also are the modernist dreams of an understanding between the different Christian religions. Nay, even between religion and species of atheism. And all on a basis of agreement that must be superior to mere doctrinal differences. What they're getting at is this idea that another modernistic understanding that all religions, fundamentally all politics, all ideas are basically the same. We all basically believe the same thing, and we all basically have the same goals in mind, so therefore all divisions should cease. This was a big thing that came out after World War II, where the great powers that were the victors after World War II kind of looked at Europe and the rest of the world and said, wow, we've nearly killed ourselves twice in 50 years. Maybe we should do our best to get rid of all these old national borders and religions and different ways of thinking. And we should all just become one and get rid of all of these old divisions that kept us apart. Sounds pretty good, right? But the only way that happens is if you completely wipe out all those individual cultures and languages and ideologies, or water them down so much to the point that people even forgot that there were differences. But the differences do matter. When we look at what has happened now since then, the world powers decided that they would stop focusing on national boundaries and national identity, but instead on economics. Because they said, well, if everybody had enough food to eat and a house and a roof over their head, then they would not want to go to war, which is mostly true. And so the governments began pumping money into the middle class and into the poor class and bringing people up out of abject poverty and getting them fat and happy where they didn't have to worry about these things again. But they realized that that was another problem as well, because then the population of the whole world just exploded. You know, we added billions of people in the last 50 years. And now this puts a severe drain on resources, and there isn't hardly enough food to go around, or oil, or electricity, or any number of things. And then they're looking around and saying, well, we didn't know this was going to happen. Now we've got too many people. Again, we hear the echoes of the French Revolution in that. Oh, there's just too many people. If you look at some long-range plans of some of these large multinational think tanks, they'll say the real population of the world should only be about 500,000. So, because we're so smart and we know what is best, we need to start shrinking that down a little bit. And I'm not going on a conspiracy theory. You can go to YouTube and listen to their speeches. This is what the people who are rich and powerful truly believe, that there's just too many people, and they've been saying the same thing for hundreds and hundreds of years. If we just had less people, we could more easily control them. But again, over here, you've got the Catholic Church on the other side saying, no, human life is precious. Even though we have a lot more of them now, we'll find a way to feed them. And everybody has a unique gift to give to the world that should be respected. And people, if they have their own culture and background, they should be able to express that without fear of violence or reprisal. If you have a different idea about something, the Catholic Church, for the most part, will say, you are free to believe that. And we could go back to history and find places where we fought wars and punished people for different ways of thinking. But usually, for the most part, the Church has said, you're free to kind of believe and think what you want to believe and think, but we're going to do our best to convince you that this is the right way. So why would that reconciliation among all men through feelings of the heart be a problem? We often see this in our understanding of crime and punishment. And I preached about this a few months ago because there's an idea that as a Christian I'm supposed to practice mercy. and they're telling me I should show mercy to people. And judgment is bad. Don't judge your neighbor. Jesus says that, right? Don't judge your neighbor. Okay, I won't judge my neighbor. But that runs into another problem where we begin to give too much space over to evil things. And evil happens in the world, and we say, oh, that person just must be misunderstood. I'm going to give them mercy, even though they haven't asked for it, or they haven't been judged by a court, and I'm automatically just going to give them all the mercy that I can. But when that happens, that evil can then prey more and more on innocent life. And some very good Christians will have mercy on evil at the expense of hundreds of innocent lives. And say, well, we just can't judge. We just can't judge. But here's the thing. The way that God has made the world is that He is the arbiter of mercy. It is God who can give mercy out, and it's not really up to us to do that. We have courts and systems of law, and He's told us the difference between good and evil. He says, avoid evil, shun evil. If someone is acting in an evil way, they ought to be treated in a way that's not going to allow them to do harm to others. Those are all also biblical principles. This idea of cheap and free mercy is not really helpful for the human person. But in modernism, they have this idea that, well, because all ways of living and thinking and believing and talking are equally good, well, you can't judge that person. Now, if you're in ministry long enough, you will encounter true evil. Talk to some people who are in the military or as a first responder, and ask them, have you ever encountered evil? I guarantee they will all say yes, because they've seen things or they've witnessed things that show them there is truly evil in the world, and it is a power. It is a powerful force that Christians must always be very careful not to invite into their homes. So, yes, we do want to have unity and agreement among all peoples, but we should only agree on the truth. We should not be forced to agree on lies or falsehoods or things that are misrepresentations of reality. And it is okay for Christians to stand up for truth, to look at the world as it is and be able to say that yes, indeed, the sky is blue. Yes, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Yes, we do have the churches open for Mass on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. Whatever reality is, it's okay to call that out and then make a judgment about it. As a human person, we have to make those judgments every day. Now, this is different from being judgmental, which can be a sin. But making a judgment about reality and good versus evil, those things are all right and good to do. But modernism says you can't do that. Modernism says that some other worldly authority will tell you what is right and what is wrong, and now you just agree with it today. If it changes tomorrow, we can change it tomorrow. So this is often how, when I say that the house, burning down the house, this is how it happens. That if there's a disagreement in a family, or if there is a discussion about truth, that it devolves into just an argument, or an argument for the sake of argument, or people don't know enough about the subject to talk about it intelligently, and then nobody really knows what the answer is. And so they all just throw their hands up in the air. Everyone admits defeat, or everyone stands on the fact that they are right and everyone else is wrong, and no consensus is ever reached. Now, the tradition of the Catholic Church, in opposition to that, considers dogmas as in part supernatural and mysterious, proposed to our faith by divinely instituted authority, on the ground that they are part of the general revelation which the apostles preached in the name of Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He came to earth, and he gave this new message. And when people heard it for the first time, they were astounded, because they'd never heard words like this before. He preached on his own authority, and the things he said resonated in people's hearts. And the only people that were offended or hurt by what he said were those who were already in positions of authority and power, living under the example of the ancient world. But now he gives a new way, but not in the way that modernism does. He shows the true way, This is God's plan for the world. You know, if you ever work with a computer, as I'm sure you do, you'll know that there might be words and pictures on the screen. But if you dig into the computer itself, you'll see that there are all kinds of microchips and wires and programs and all sorts of bits and bobs in there that make the computer work. This is what Jesus does through the gospel. He takes away the veil from reality and shows us the inner workings of God's mind. He says, this is how God made the world. This is how God made you. This is how the whole thing works together. And if you dig in and understand it, then you will better be able to guide your life based on these principles. Not something we made up, but understanding what the world really is. And his apostles, they were amazed to hear these things as well. So things like goodness and truth and beauty and forgiveness and true reconciliation and obedience to the Father's will. There are many other things. But those dogmas and doctrines of the church are things that resonate with the human person and actually work. Even look at how we celebrate the Mass. The Mass is fundamentally, think of it like a campfire. This is how all human problems have been solved for something like 20,000 years. You gather around a central area with a fire burning. We always have candles up here during Mass. And you share a bit of food and you talk. And if you ever sit down at your kitchen table or at your dinner table, put some food around and light a candle in the middle, you're being part of something that the human race has done for all of these years. Now, Christ sacramentalizes it and says this isn't just a campfire, this isn't just the dining room table, this is the table of God's feast. And we are going to gather around, we're going to hear what God has to say, we're going to resolve our differences in a manner that is mutually acceptable in accordance with God's will, and then go forth into the world and try to teach other people to do the same. Faith is an act of the intellect made under the sway of the will. What that means is the will always wants what is good, and the intellect sifts through all the things in the world that are out there, and then shows the will, this is the good, and the will then freely chooses it. By it we hold firmly what God has revealed and what the church proposes to us to believe. For believing is holding something firmly on the authority of God's word, when such authority may be recognized by signs that are sufficient, at least with the help of grace, to create certitude. So it is God who gives us this faith. And what I'm asking us all to do this evening, as I conclude my talk, is really think about what that looks like. When you decide that you are going to live your life according to God's will and not your own, what now has to change? What are those sorts of ideas and those beliefs that you hold on to very firmly that are really not of God? And are you willing to give them up for the chance at a better life? This is what Christ is offering you today. A religious submission to his holy will, turning away from the way of the world and all the distractions that are out there, and instead finding the truth and seeking only that.